This is Mad About Markets, and in case you're wondering why we keep talking about cricket, because it's the Indian cricket team which is the foreteller of what's to come in the Indian nation as well, Ritu.
We had it in the grooming episode if the beards were anything to go by.
Well, so let's talk about this. The composition of the team. The 1983 World Cup squad had 8 out of 11 people coming in from the metros. Come to 2019, the last ODI World Cup, we had just Rohit Sharma, Virat Kohli and a couple of others coming from the metros. Everyone else was from Tier 2 and beyond. Is that what's happening?
That's exactly right, because we're talking about the
Bharat opportunity.
Well, we've spoken about the Bharat opportunity across various episodes, Mangalam, but today what we're going to do is size up the opportunity in its entirety because, you know, internet penetration, that is driving this big change. And it's not just Tier 1 cities, it's beyond that to Tier 1, Tier 2, Tier 3 and more. Now, India, it currently has more than 700 million internet users, of which about half are on digital payment apps, and they're using those to buy more than ever before. 220 million are shoppers. These numbers are expected to grow exponentially as India's household income continues to rise. And according to a Google and Bain report, India is going to see 480 million rural internet users come 2025, and these are going to be huge drivers.
These are going to be huge drivers from Tier 2 cities and beyond, and that's actually being a force multiplier for growth itself. In fact, we're looking at some important reports coming in. Kearney India's retail index says that smaller cities beyond the top 100 will be the ones that will drive the next wave of development and growth. I mean, sample this. India's smaller cities and towns currently account for 63% of all e-commerce orders. That's not all. Over 60% of fashion shoppers coming from Tier 2 cities and beyond. 83% of the people in Tier 2 cities and beyond are willing to try new products. In fact, that's a captive consumer, captive audience for you. And that's not all as well. If growth is something to go by, albeit on a low base, it is much higher than Tier 1 cities. As of 2022 itself, over 2021, and remember 2021 was a pandemic year, so we already saw an increase in online shopping. T1 cities grew at just about 10%, T2 cities 51%, and Tier 3 and beyond showed a growth of 65% in terms of the orders that they were placed. So that's a big opportunity that we're talking about.
And it's not just limited to e-commerce, you know, Mangalam, because companies whose businesses are receiving a boost from non-metro cities are aplenty. For instance, Tata Consumer, where a large chunk of the business comes from outside the top 16 cities. You also have the FMCG giant Nestle, which told us that small town consumers are moving towards their brands quite gradually. Hear out what they had to say.
Today, 35 to 40% of my business comes outside of these 16 large cities of this country, if you will. And the growth rate of those outside of these 16 cities is phenomenal. And if I go and peel it further, and if I go to the, the Tier 2, Tier 3, we are starting to see a large amount of pull for very highly innovative products. And so if I look at the entire piece and our entire distribution growth, all of those which are growing in magnitudes of lakhs, are all actually happening in the Tier 2 and Tier 3. And that's where we're also witnessing. And it's not just about bringing the product there. We are actually seeing a large amount of consumption, large amount of repeat consumption. And I think that's what makes the Bharat story stronger as India grows to become a powerhouse.
There are about 30 odd projects which are on the anvil in terms of new products and new categories. About 10 new product launches have already happened in 2023 in the first half, more to come. So really one is complementing this with an increasing proclivity of small town India, or Bharat as I call it, moving towards our brands. So whether it is Tier 2 towns to Tier 6 towns or indeed rural markets, this is the time one is seeing that they are actually adopting our brands. So a few years ago, if I were to visit a rural market, let's say in UP or in Madhya Pradesh or any of these states, I would have found at best 2 or 3 SKUs of the company on the shelf. Today, I find 10 or 15.
Well, they said it, but if you look at the e-commerce picture again, now all of the action there right now, whether it is sellers or consumers, is mostly from Tier 2 and beyond cities. So let's pull that up for you. Meesho, for instance, said that almost 41% of its sales came from Tier 2 cities and beyond, and 24% of the sellers are actually from Tier 4 cities. Take a look at Flipkart's cart as well. 60% of the consumers were from Tier 3 cities and beyond. And this is another surprising one. For Nykaa, 84% of the sales actually came from Tier 2 cities and beyond that. So what is driving this kind of growth? Now, with affordable and easily accessible internet, awareness in Tier 2 and beyond cities is just rising, and it also helps that it's a lot easier to buy now with just the click of a button, thanks to the penetration of digital, so you can buy anything from anywhere. Other key drivers are strong logistics infrastructure, which helps companies to deliver to some of the remotest areas of the country. There's deeper penetration of brands and outlets. And of course, we've seen a reverse migration, which happened post the pandemic. So all of these are driving the opportunity towards, beyond Tier 1 and Tier 2 cities.
That's a whole host of drivers for T2 and beyond. So let's also ask Siddharth Jain. Let's welcome him on the show. He's the one who's written the Kearney report. Siddharth, thank you for joining us. What, according to you, are the factors that are driving growth in Tier 2 and beyond as far as your research findings are concerned?
On supply side, we see increasingly brands across segments opening stores, entering these markets and being present. So availability has improved for almost all categories. As per our research, 25% outlets of the what we call as the power brands, the top quartile brands in any segment, is actually in these towns already, right? So, and this is growing, and the new stores are increasingly opened here. The second supply side factor is e-commerce. Very surprisingly, greater than 1/3 demand of e-commerce is already coming from the smaller towns. So that also is a big supply side factor. On the demand side, obviously there is affordability that's improving as the middle class consumers move up the income curve. But aspirations of especially the youth in these towns is rapidly growing, and that's driven by access to digital content. The youth in these towns are watching the same content as metro and large cities, and they are aspiring to own brands. They're aspiring to have the same kind of products. So that's driving the consumption, right? So it's a combination of improved supply and improved affordability on the demand side.
Well, we're talking about the Bharat opportunity out here, and we know that India is on course to witness a 4 times growth in consumer spend by 2030. But the question is, where exactly does it go, right? So if you just slice and dice India, you have the metros, the top 8 cities, you have the Tier 1 and beyond, and then you have rural.
Yeah.
Metros are saturated, expected to, have the same contribution to the GDP at 16% all the way up until 2030. Rural India may see its contribution decline from 46% all the way down to 41%. It's 47%, so to say. But it's the Tier 1 and beyond where they have been punching above their weight. Tier 1 and 2 Tier 4 cities currently account for 37% of the GDP. They're likely to be 43% of the GDP by 2030.
So what does all of this put together means in terms of contribution to the overall GDP from the metros, from the non-metros, from Tier 2 and beyond cities?
Well, sizing up the Bharat opportunity, rising share in a rising economy itself, right? So put those calculations up. India's 2023 GDP at $3 trillion. Tier 1 to Tier 4 share is 37%. Now this GDP is expected to rise, balloon all the way up to $7 trillion, and this share is likely to increase to 43%. So numerically speaking, the incremental share of Bharat in India's GDP would be $1.8 trillion. So that's basically the sum and substance of the Bharat opportunity.
There are some cities with untapped potential, each having their own growth stories. These hidden gems, as we call them, present a trove of golden opportunities on your screen. Some of them have already been seized, some of the others not so much. In Salem, in Tamil Nadu, for instance, there already are initiatives worth 1,200 crores that are in the pipeline. In Karnal, in Haryana, that is looking to grow itself as a tourism hotspot now. Then you move on to Bhavnagar in Gujarat, for instance, that has projects of 6,000 crores in the pipeline, majorly in the renewable renewable energy and semiconductor space. In Bharat, again in Gujarat, it is becoming a hub for pharma and chemical industries with projects of nearly 8,000 crore rupees.
Well, so many hidden gems in the country. We talk about new cities. So let's talk about what other companies which are supplying to these rural areas are facing as well. For instance, car maker Hyundai expects rural markets to factor in a fifth of their overall sales this year. Asian Paints too said in their first quarter numbers that their tier 3 and tier 4 cities are almost catching up with the metros. Let's hear them out.
We are seeing that not only tier 2 but tier 3, or we call the rural markets, the share continues to go up because now they are very well connected and they don't want to use public transport. They want to have their own car. Also the service has reached. So all those factors I think are really contributing. So just to give you a perspective on, say, the rural penetration, if I may say, so about, say, 4 years back, the rural penetration used to be 16%, moved to 17, then 18, and this year we are expecting that probably close to 19% of our sales would be from the rural market as such, which are basically hinterland, which are basically not your tier 1, tier 2, tier 3, but actually tier 4 and below markets.
We felt that the rural markets have kind of really bounced back a little from what we were seeing them in quarter 3 and quarter 4 to that extent. In fact, our growths, if we see in the T3, T4 cities, have been almost equal to T1, T2 to that extent. So I think it's a very positive sign for at least our industry in terms of what we are seeing in terms of going forward, where this is something which possibly augurs well as we kind of go ahead.
Well, let's dig deeper into that Bharat opportunity we've been speaking about, because we have a special guest joining us in studio, Mr. Damodar Mal, who is the CEO of Reliance Retail. Mr. Mal, thank you for being here, the man who's seen the Bharat opportunity really build up over the years. Thanks very much for your time.
Good to be here.
So, if you could start by telling us, back in the day, corporates, for instance, would not always look beyond the metros when trying to grow their business. How has that story changed over the last few years?
Don't know about corporates and FMCG, but I can tell you about retail.
Okay.
In retail, we find the smaller towns, tier 2 and below, juicy and interesting. The aspirations have been democratized, and we see it happen every day in our stores in tier 2 and smaller towns.
So let's talk about presence then. What proportion of your stores are in the tier 2 and beyond, and what rate are they growing at?
2/3, 65% of our stores are there. And there is demand we see, and our bet on consumption is both in the larger towns as well as smaller. So all ships are rising. So the growth we are launching stores everywhere.
There's been a bit of a slowdown, right? Have rural areas been worse affected? Are they still resilient? What is the trend you're seeing there versus the metros?
One qualifier. I am modern retail.
Yes.
Yeah. So relatively well-to-do people come on this platform, whether large towns or small towns.
Right.
So given that lens, we find categories growing. We do not see downgrades happening on our platform.
Everyone's talking about it's Bharat's time. What do you think is the driver for tier 2 and beyond?
The driver for any consumer, forget the class of town. See, income increases are for real.
Yes.
The long-term trend of family income increases over real. But to me, income increase is potential energy. It's capacity to spend.
Yeah.
Apne aap, it doesn't become kinetic energy or behavior. And that's where aspiration needs to happen. And then access. Otherwise, the Indian families, the natural behavior we see is in the hands of the family, things that look like capital investment.
Well, Mr. Mal, before we take that break, I have to ask you this, the story of the shopping cart and how teenagers are driving growth in tier 2 and beyond for their parents.
We see it all the time, and yeah, that's a story. There is a shopping cart. This is Udaipur, so not exactly a small town as I call it, but yeah, but outskirts of Udaipur. In our store, I found a trolley and a customer. The two didn't match in my eyes.
Okay. What would that mean?
When I saw the profile of the customer, it was a very simpleton, sari over her head person.
Yeah.
And what I saw in the trolley were if I can take a name, then Jim Jams and pastas and things of that kind.
Yeah.
I said, yeah, these two are not matching. There has to be an influence which is elsewhere. So I decided to what I do for a living is to trace that trolley through the store. And from behind the rack came the influencer, which was the teenage daughter. And in every category, I saw her talking to her mother, telling her why they should be buying these things and why her old habits are worth changing and they can afford to do that. And if the mother was shopping herself, the trolley would have been very different.
Well, we want to continue this conversation, but we have to take a very short break. Don't go anywhere. We're going to discuss the yays and the mays, and as always, ask the bigger question.
The bigger question, is it Bharat's time to make India shine? We get everyone's views on this.